These stories are first-hand accounts shared by Reddit users, detailing unsettling real-life encounters that left lasting impressions. Each narrative provides a chilling glimpse into moments of danger, survival, and eerie coincidences that might make you rethink your surroundings. Disclaimer: these accounts were originally published by Reddit users and are presented as personal experiences. While they are described as true events, their accuracy relies on the original storytellers. The details shared here are intended for awareness and cautionary purposes only. Viewer discretion is advised. Story 1. Creepy Old Lady in the Park. Some backstory, of course. This story takes place several years ago when I was in 7th or 8th grade, 12 to 13 years old. My school, like most others in the area, would allow the 7th and 8th graders to go out for lunch on Fridays. That is, provided you brought in a note from your parents that morning allowing you to do so. We would have an hour from 12:45 to 1:45 to leave school property to grab some food nearby and roam around the neighborhood. So this was one of those Fridays. It was probably spring because I remember it being a pleasant temperature outside, but possibly some rain. I can't quite remember. Myself and 2 other girlfriends had decided to walk to the local Asian grocer and get Chinese food from the hot table. Once we got our food, we decided to sit in a park we frequented that was about halfway between the school and the grocery store. It had one of those colored metal and plastic play structures designed to look kind of like a treehouse. We set ourselves up to eat in the play structure on the platform under the green plastic foliage of the treehouse. It was a pretty big park with the wood-chipped play structure and swing set area, along with a baseball diamond and some picnic tables in between the two. The rest of the park was a big open field with an incline on one side leading to the fenced backyards of a row of houses. The opposite side of the park was bordered by a small creek/lake. There were 2 streets bordering the other 2 parallel ends of the park. Before the creek was a walking path and then a strip of grass with benches and garbage cans placed on it periodically throughout the park. Then the small creek. It was quite a shallow creek, probably only half a foot to a foot deep. The creek was bordered on either side with a thin layer of skinny little trees and other brush, but you could still partially see through to the other side. If you crossed through the creek from the park, you would end up in the parking lot of an abandoned hotel. The hotel was, of course, on the other side of the lot. It had been abandoned maybe 5 to 10 years before this. It was the only hotel in our town, and I guess our smallish town didn't get too many visitors because the whole building was just abandoned one day. The hotel is probably 4 or 5 stories tall and the windows are all boarded up. Apparently everything inside the hotel was just left the way it was too. I had heard that lots of homeless people now took shelter in the abandoned hotel. Additionally, the creek ran under one of the bordering roads, creating a super creepy, very heavily graffitied tunnel underneath. It was a decently long concrete tunnel that was big enough that we could stand up in it at ages 12 to 13, but would probably require anyone much taller to crouch a little. So back to this day, we were sitting on the play structure eating our Chinese food and sharing from a big family-sized bottle of Sunny D, as we didn't have enough money to each get drinks separately. Everything was fine and dandy until we saw an elderly woman come out of the creek and through the brush, heading in our direction. Now this was one of those classic-looking grandmas with a walker, so we were immediately really weirded out wondering how she could have possibly gotten into the creek with a walker. Weird enough, but whatever. We started to get concerned when she walked past the pathway through the park, heading towards us instead of turning either way and leaving the park. Like I said, this was a very stereotypical-looking old woman. She walked hunched over her walker, moving quite slowly. She had white or gray curly hair with a scarf tied around her face. She was wearing big sunglasses as well, so a lot of her face was covered up. She was also wearing several layers of typical old lady clothing, looking quite bundled up given the season. She is still heading towards us and eventually comes up to the side of the play structure. She stops right in front of a ladder of about 3 or 4 steps that would lead you from the ground to the platform we were sitting on. Once again, kind of odd as she needed assistance walking, so she would most definitely not be able to climb up a ladder. She is very close to us now, close enough that we couldn't even whisper between the 3 of us girls because she would be able to hear it. But because she was so close, I got a much better look at her. After standing there a few seconds, she smiles at us. Definitely a creepy smile, but that wasn't even what struck me as odd. It's kind of difficult to explain, but it wasn't an old woman's smile. The teeth were perfect. Not perfect enough to be dentures or veneers, but looked like perfect young gently used teeth. I realized that I really couldn't see much else of her face. The scarf and the sunglasses really covered her up. But like I said, the parts you could see did not look how you'd expect. The cogs in my brain turned and the stereotypical old lady look made sense. There was absolutely no one else in this entire park. We were alone with this creepy old lady. It must have been 7th grade because none of us had phones yet. Luckily, this was the age of the iPod Touch. Somehow, one of my friend's dads saved us in the nick of time. Her dad had called her just at the right second. He said he was around the corner just about here to pick us up, and my friend repeats the message out loud. As she did this, the old lady stands up straight, picks up the walker and runs out of the park. This hunched-over lady, barely able to walk, just straightened up into a tall person who just picked up and sprinted away with urgency. No longer hunchbacked and no longer needed the walker, but ran away as a completely different person who, mind you, ran quite fast and with ease. Not someone that was struggling but made a run for it. But wait a minute, you couldn't call people on an iPod unless you had Wi-Fi, which we most certainly did not in the middle of a park. My friend explained that what she did was go to the settings app on her iPod Touch. She went to the sound settings where you could slide the volume of the ringer up or down and it would play your ringtone at that volume out loud. She did this so subtly that we all really thought her dad had called her for a minute. She pretended that the ringing was her dad calling her on her phone, and made up the idea that he was just about to be there to pick us up. So yeah, basically this was someone who either walked through the creek from the hotel, or even came through from under the bridge. They wanted us to see them as an innocent old woman, not being immediately startled when they began heading our way. Who knows what they would have done next / were planning to do, but I am very glad we never found out. My friends and I all agreed that this person was definitely a man due to the height as well as the general cadence of this person. There was no chance that this was actually an old woman. It became so obvious that it was a disguise. A man disguised as an elderly woman preying on unassuming 12-year-old girls. Who knows what his intentions were? I feel like the moral of this story is that if you are in a situation where you feel unsafe and cannot phone somebody for whatever reason, at least pretend to. I think this is a pretty basic instinct though, as lots of people shout out to intruders that the cops are on their way, when they haven't even called yet. So to the creep disguising herself as an elderly woman, let's definitely not meet again. Story 2. Newspaper ad from hell. This situation still gives me chills till this day. I lived in a sketchy part of the neighborhood, but I had never had a job outside other than helping my mom. So I was very naive and gullible at the time. I was out of high school and looking for a job. I had worked with my mom junior to senior year cleaning houses, but I wanted to work somewhere else and gain some outside experience. When I had graduated high school, my mom and I decided it was time to look for another job because I needed some money for college. My mom loved to read newspapers and we would get a Spanish newspaper called Mundo Hispanico every single week. I would look through it once in a while to read the comics or to see job ads at the end. One evening I was so determined to find an ad that paid well and was something else that would give me another set of work skills. I was going through the classification section at the end of the newspaper when I found what I thought to be the perfect job for me. I don't remember word for word, but it was something along the lines of looking for young females ages 18 to 25 for an open massage position at this location. Now the location they gave was 0.3 miles away from where I stayed, so I thought it was perfect. I could walk to and from without having to worry about transportation since we only had one car. Massage training will be provided and the pay is handsomely good. Our girls earn anywhere from $500 to $900 a week. I thought, whoa, what a great wage, I can pay off my college in no time. I was so excited that I fit the profile that I showed my mom the job ad. My mom wasn't excited like I was, and she had told me that it looked a little suspicious. That I should call first to see if there really was another person on the other side. So I called and a lady answered. I asked about the free training, how much do you really make, and where the location was exactly. She seemed very sweet on the phone and told me before we moved forward they were doing interviews and already had other candidates on their list. She said that I could come in for an interview to see if I would make it to the second round of interviews. I agreed. She gave me the address and I looked it up. When I saw it was 0.3 miles from my apartment, I was so happy. I told my mom that I would be going to the interview at set time, at this location and alone. She told me there was no way I would be going alone and she would come with me. I was so mad because I wanted to do this by myself without her having to help me, because in my little mind I thought I was all grown up and didn't need help from her. The day came and she drove us in the only car we had. Now this address the lady gave me was weird because it took us to a motel behind the shopping plaza that was next to our apartment. It didn't make sense to me why they would have an interview there, so we just circled the plaza looking for the place. My mom got frustrated and told me to just call the lady for the exact location. So I did, and she told me that they were in the motel room and that they were there because it was a safety precaution. It seemed to make sense to me. I told her that I still could not find the place so she could speak to my mother and tell her where exactly this place was. "You're with your mother?" This time her voice changed from sweet to an almost angry/panic one. I said yes, I am with her right now because she is driving me. So I passed the phone to my mom and she said, "Hello," 3 times or so. The lady had hung up on her. So I called 2 more times but she never picked up the phone. I was mad that the lady had just hung up and so we went back home. I never put 2 and 2 together until about 3 years after when I heard on the news that there was a newspaper job ad that had been busted and the people charged with human trafficking. The ad was very similar to the one I had read years ago. I thanked my mom over and over because if it wasn't for her I could have been dead or have been trafficked multiple times. I don't know where I would have ended up. I am so grateful for my mom, despite me being angry at her for coming with me, because if it wasn't for her I wouldn't be where I am today. So, sweet voice lady from the newspaper ad, let's not meet ever again. Story 3. A home intruder came into my room one night. I am a 27-year-old woman, and this happened to me 9 or 10 years ago when I was a senior in high school. We lived in a pretty large house, but my siblings were all away at college or boarding school, so it was only my parents and I in the house. I am a crazy light sleeper. So when I woke up in the dark and saw my alarm clock flashing at 3:11 a.m., I wasn't too surprised. However, I was wide awake, not just groggily stirring in my sleep. I lay there, wondering what had woken me, when I heard very soft footsteps on the stairs outside my bedroom. The door to my room was parallel to the left side of the bed, and I happened to be laying with my back to the door. When the footsteps approached my door, I thought it must be one of my parents, checking on me for some reason. Then the doorknob was turned so slowly. Still, I thought they were just trying not to wake me. The door began to open, again, slowly and carefully. It made a creaking noise, no matter how slowly it was opened, so the person finally just shoved it the rest of the way, to silence the creak. Still, my naive brain thought it was one of my parents. Until they clicked on a flashlight. I froze. Terror flooded me, and I remember that I instantly broke out in sweat. They were behind me, and I was facing away, so they couldn't see my eyes wide open as they shone the beam straight on me. I always used to think that if something like that ever happened, I would be such a badass and I would whip out of bed and punch them, attack them, shout, scream, do something. But I could do nothing at all. All I could do was try to keep my breathing deep and even, despite the pounding of my heart, so that the intruder wouldn't know I was awake. After about 10 seconds, they finally moved the light away. I prayed and begged and bartered with anything that would listen to me as the intruder walked around my room, looking at my things. I could vaguely see their shape, large and bulky, like they were wearing 2 coats. They had a baseball cap on. They didn't shine the flashlight on me again, and after a few minutes, which felt like an eternity, they left my room. I could still hear them, though, walking around the rest of the 2nd floor, through my siblings' empty bedrooms. I was still sweating, still frozen in terror, not knowing what to do. I wanted to grab my phone and call my dad, sleeping downstairs. I wanted to call our landline, so that the phone would ring and wake my parents up. I wanted to call the police, I wanted to get up and run from my room, I wanted to cry, but I couldn't do any of those things. I was afraid that they would hear me, and I didn't know if they had a weapon and would try to hurt me or my parents. I wouldn't wish such helpless terror on my worst enemy. I don't know how, but I must have passed out from fear, or the adrenaline wore off and I fell asleep somehow, because the next thing I knew it was 6 a.m. and I could hear my parents downstairs. I ran downstairs and as calmly as I could, I asked them if one of them had been in my room last night. Their faces went blank and they said no, they hadn't. That was the last straw. I broke down in sobs and told them, then someone was in my room last night. Even as I type this, my hands have begun shaking and I've teared up. The police were called, even though there was little they could do at that point. Apparently, when my parents woke up, all of the doors to the outside were standing wide open, and there was a duffel bag at the bottom of the stairs. All that was inside was a coil of nylon rope and an empty USB flash drive. I don't want to think about what it was for. The intruder hadn't taken anything, and we have no idea why they left in what appeared to be a hurry. It took me about a week to be able to sleep in my own room, a sanctuary which felt violated and frightening to me now. I carry pepper spray, sleep with a machete next to my bed, and double-check my locks every night. Hopefully this will never happen again, but if it does, hopefully I won't freeze. It's been 10 years, and my most common nightmare is that someone is in my room, standing in the shadows, watching me. Story 4. Not all guests are welcome. I have been working for an independent hotel for just over 4 years now. We're the #1 rated hotel in our city, and proud of it. I mostly work in housekeeping, but have done some time at the front desk as well. I love my job and have always said that my bosses are great. Now, being a housekeeper, I've seen some things. I've seen a room where someone snuck in their dog, kitten, and chicken. We don't allow pets. I once had a room that I was cleaning as a stay-over that had tripods set up around the bed, professional camera equipment cases, adult-sized pacifier, on-site, and XL-sized children's diapers. The 2 people that were in that room were in their early 20s. I even had a room once where we had to call the cops on a raid because we found meth. They found a lot of drugs and guns in that room. But today is the first time I've ever actually felt scared to be in a guest's room. As I'm working on a room that's already been vacated, a man in the next room catches me at my supply cart. He's set to be staying for several days and tells me, "You can go ahead and clean my room now. I'm going down for breakfast." Excellent. I love getting my stay-overs done early on. It makes things easier for the people working laundry the sooner we get the dirty laundry down to them. So, I pop over into his room, opening it up and propping the door open with a stopper like we always do. The first thing I notice is that he has around 20 prescription bottles lined up on one of the 2 beds, along with insulin and needles. I'm nosy, I'll admit it, and I wanted to see what he was on. Oddly, it was only 2 different types of medication for all 20 bottles. About 2/3 were a diabetes medication, and the rest were a cholesterol medication. That's a little weird that he has so many bottles of the same meds, but whatever. I go to make the bed and see that some of the bedding has been stained, and sigh, knowing now I'll have to change all the bedding now instead of just being able to turn down the sheets and blanket. So, I leave the room, closing it behind me to go get the linens I need, and then head right back to the room. I prop the door open again, and head to set the clean linens on the desk chair, when I see out of the corner of my eye 2 notes sitting on the TV armoire. It wouldn't mean anything except I caught the word, "kill," scrawled on it. I dropped the linens and took a closer look. What I read on the first note made my blood run cold. "You don't have to forgive her, you just can't kill her. You are here to take money and alcohol away from you. Get over having to kill her and you can safely leave." My heart was pounding. My eyes went to the second note, which had just looked like a to-do list at first glance, but in the end made my stomach churn. Spray and wash. Apply for Medicare. Insubordination. The soul is healed by being with children. Bank card follow-up. Inheritance. Savings. Kauai Pop 10,500. Map Montana. There will be a day of reckoning. Did you tell Mom what I said? How did Bev get my address? It was too much. I quickly snapped pictures of them on my phone so I could show my boss why I would not clean his room. I left the room quickly, closing it up behind me. As the door closes, I turn and I see the man just 10 feet away from me, coming back to his room. My heart is in my throat, but I manage a smile and tell him, I need more supplies. I'll be back to your room in a bit. I take off straight for the elevator, having noticed our maintenance man waiting for the slow transport. In a hushed tone, I tell him what I found, and he sees I'm shaken, not a normal state for me. He rides down with me, and I go straight to my boss and tell her that for the first time in all these years, I am not comfortable being in a guest's room. I show her the pictures, and her face is still and pale. She goes to the front desk and asks our general manager for a minute of her time and brings her into the office to show her. She agreed this was not a safe situation and took our maintenance man with her to go inform the man he had 1 hour to get his belongings and leave the hotel, and he was not welcome back. I spent a few minutes in the laundry room trying to calm down, then my boss went back up with me to the floor until the man was officially out of the hotel. I don't know who Bev is, I don't know who the woman is that he didn't feel he needed to forgive. But man in room 422, let's never meet again. Story 5. I was chased through the midnight sun by an armed militia. Alaska is the perfect place to go if you want to get away from the rest of the world. As America's least densely populated state, you have plenty of breathing room from any kind of authority or prying eyes that may want to know what you're up to. For this reason, my home state is very attractive to all sorts of weird and unsavory groups. I've stumbled across Scientology centers at the end of a dirt back road with nothing else for miles around, heard stories from doomsday preppers who claim to have bunkers made out of shipping containers in the sides of mountains, and met people who have come out of religious cults in the interior that wanted to keep their followers away from any contact with the outside world. All of this and more you can find in Alaska. I was born and raised in Anchorage, the only big city in the state. Growing up, we had about 250,000 people in a city. It takes about 30 minutes tops to drive across, so that gives you an idea for what we up north consider a big city. The only other real city in the state is Fairbanks. These two cities are connected by 360 miles of a 2-lane highway. It's a 7-hour drive one way to get between them through one of the most beautiful landscapes on the planet. Mountains rise up on either side of you between Anchorage and Denali National Park before you drive through these colossal canyons, carved out of the rock over tens of thousands of years by melting glaciers and rivers. Past Denali is another 3 hours of driving through a vast, flat, interior plain with mountains in the distance. I say all this to help you understand just how desolate it feels in Alaska, even on the highway. After you get out of Anchorage or Fairbanks, there is nothing but wilderness as far as the eye can see, save for the occasional small town with a max population of about 1,000 people on a good day. 10 years back it was even less. Alaskan girls are built tough. We change tires, hunt, fish, camp, and generally have a great appreciation for the great outdoors that women in the lower 48 don't really have if they're near a city. The joke is that Anchorage is the biggest rural city in the country. All this brings context to the following story. In high school things were different, or at least they felt different. I was a young and stupid woman who thought I could conquer anything due to the aforementioned, built tough attitude I was raised with. Senior year of high school, I decided to treat myself to a camping trip into the mountains up past Talkeetna. Nothing fancy, just an overnight or two in the most beautiful state at the most beautiful time of the year, mid-June. Going up north in peak summer here has a weird feeling to it. The sun never really sets. If you've ever seen the movie Midsummer, that's what it's like. It gets to about dusk and that's it. It's still bright and sunny out the whole night though. Shout out to readers in the far north of Scandinavia and Greenland. The false sense of security I had thinking that the midnight sunlight would mean safety probably nearly got me killed or worse. My second mistake was not telling anyone where I was going. I just packed up for my trip, stopped at Subway for lunch, and headed out into the great beyond. The drive was fine. A solid 2.5 hours of driving north along the highway took up most of the afternoon as I jammed out to the greatest hits from the radio on Cool 97.3. After you get through the Matsu Valley, you get into the mountains again. Tall spruce and evergreen trees line the road on both sides with the occasional empty space where there has been some clear-cut logging. All of this gives you a sense that while you're out in the wilderness, you are still connected to civilization in some way. This led me to my biggest mistake, not staying at a state park campground. I was in high school with only a part-time job and didn't want to pay the $15 overnight camp fee and was too scared to risk the fine, so I found a spot that looked good and pulled off the road. The map I got from my dad said there was an old mining site up a nearby mountain, so I decided that would be the best spot to head to for an overnight. My logic must have been that it was badass to spend a night in a mining ghost town or something. Pulled off the road, packed up my backpack, put on some bug spray, grabbed my map and compass and started off into the woods. Now this hadn't been the first time I had done this. I've been on wilderness backpacking trips on my own with my dad through my childhood. I knew my orientation skills and had taken some wilderness survival courses at camp. I wasn't just some dumb blonde wandering off into the woods with no idea of where I was, or so I thought. A solid 45-minute hike up into the hills and I finally made it to where the old mining camp was supposed to be. There was nothing there. Just an old concrete foundation with some holes in it and nothing else. I was very disappointed but unsurprised at the outcome. I set up camp off in the woods and set to building a fire for dinner on the concrete slab. Here you're supposed to set up cooking a ways off from your camp just in case bears are nosy. The last thing you want is a 1,300 pounds grizzly poking his nose in your tent wondering why you smell like Campbell's soup and s'mores. By this time it was getting late, about 10 p.m., but the sun was still high in the sky, and by the time dinner was over it was nearly 11. I was starving and dug in. About an hour later it was about as dark as it was going to get, so I hunkered down in my tent for the night, confident that the overgrowth was private enough for whatever animals might come out around then. I woke to voices in the distance and slow-moving crashing through the underbrush. My first thought was hunters. My dad and I had run into a few on some campouts, so it wasn't uncommon. I relaxed and figured they would just pass through without incident and closed my eyes again. That's when they found my fire pit. A man's voice cried out into the brightish forest, "Who the fuck is camping on our property?" I froze. I knew I had fucked up and was getting up, grabbing my purse and putting on my shoes so I could go apologizes before I heard the man again, "When we find you, you're fucking dead. You're on private militia property and trespassers get shot." That's when the whole situation changed. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't just pack up my tent and shit with some armed guy lurking around. I carefully put my shoes on, put my keys in my purse, and slunk away into the underbrush as quietly as I could. My thought was to slip away, wait until they got bored and left, then go back, pack up, and leave. I spent 20 minutes hunkered behind a log in the woods, barely in earshot before I heard a second voice calling for the others. They had found my tent and were tearing it apart going through my stuff. I heard one shout out, "Bed's still warm," and "Trespassers a chick. She left her underwear." The first man shouted out, "Okay, fan out and find her. Bitch thinks she can trespass, then there's gonna be hell to pay." At that point I wasn't concerned that I had left my spare change of underwear in my bag or that these creeps had found it. I needed to get out of there. Quietly I made my way down the mountain for a good 30 minutes, tiptoeing and taking care not to step on twigs or make a ruckus. After the rustling and shouting of the men had faded quite a bit, I said fuck it and booked it as fast as I could in the midnight sun down the hills. I tripped and fell and got scraped up more times than I'd care to remember. Finally, I made it back to the road, but much to my horror, there was no car. I knew I had come out up or down the road from where I had been. I couldn't quite remember where I was at the time, but picked a direction and started walking. I rounded a corner on the road and saw my car, and the two men standing beside it. They were armed and dressed in surplus military gear. I hid in the brush on the side of the road and watched. A while later several more men appeared from the trail I had taken. They dumped all of my stuff next to my car, hopped back on their ATVs and drove off. I went up to my car, careful not to be seen, and found a note on my dashboard. It read something like, "If we ever catch you on our property again, we won't hesitate to use force. Consider this a warning." I went back to start loading stuff into my car and noticed what they had done. They'd cut up or destroyed all of my gear, probably as punishment for trespassing. Honestly, I'm thankful they did that because I'm grateful I didn't get shot. Ever since then I have taken great care to camp only in designated camping areas. To the weird Alaskan militia group, I know you weren't actually going to kill me, but nevertheless, let's not meet. Story 6. Satanic Castle. This is my second post to this subreddit. It happened to me and the man I was dating back in the late spring of 2000. I am an avid and experienced urban explorer. I have visited many different abandoned sites. This place I'm writing about has been explored several times by others since, but when I visited it wasn't a common knowledge location and all the buildings were still intact except for the main house which had, from what I had heard, burned, leaving nothing but the outer stone wall. Nothing but the outer wall remains. All the other buildings have been torn down since I was there. To more recent urban explorers, it is known as the Stone Castle, and more recently the Osler Castle. This is the name given by the Heritage Society that has decided to fix it up. When my boyfriend at the time discovered it, he saw it in the distance from a roof he was working on in Oro, Midden. There was, but not anymore, a large barn, a carriage house, and towards the back of the property, a stable. The first weekend we both had off together, we made the hour drive to explore it. The property was absolutely stunning, on the top of a hill back from the road. You could almost imagine living surrounded by such beauty, and we did exactly that. The house itself was gone except for the wall, and if you looked in the basement window, you could see an old stove laying amongst the wreckage. You could tell it had been a beautiful home at one time, to whomever owned it. Being the explorer I insisted that we investigate every single corner of every single building that was on the property, and although my ex was less than enthusiastic about it, I insisted. I honestly did not see the point of driving for an hour just to look at the outside of the buildings. No, I had to go in the buildings. The first building we explored was the barn, both upstairs and down. Down in the basement of the barn is where things went from wow to holy shit really fast. In the basement it had been used as a place for satanic sacrifices. There was satanic artwork all over, a knife with what appeared to be blood on it, and an altar with black candles, a bottle of what smelled like blood. The most disturbing piece was that whatever satanic group was using it, they had built a makeshift cage out of the silo with chains inside and everything. My boyfriend at the time wanted to get the heck out of there as fast as possible, but I convinced him to stay so we could explore the rest of the buildings on the property. I told him it was probably just a bunch of kids, just screwing around, no big deal, right? Our next stop was the stables at the back of the property, and honestly, I was so caught up in my love for exploring that he would not have been able to persuade me to leave without going into every single building no matter what. I opened the door into the stable and the smell hit me, rotting flesh, and the entire room was littered with animal corpses, dogs, cats, rabbits, even coyotes and foxes. They had been horribly mutilated. It was absolutely the worst thing I have ever laid my eyes on. As soon as my boyfriend saw that, he grabbed me and said that we were leaving right at that moment, and that killing animals is not stupid kids doing stupid things. This is some serious shit. So we started to leave, but there was one more building I wanted to check on the way out, the carriage house. He said no effing way were we going there and stomped off up the hill back to the main house, assuming I would follow. I didn't follow. I went around the hill by myself and took a quick peek in the carriage house. The carriage house was anticlimactic. It had absolutely nothing in it. It's actually a good thing that I snuck off like I did, because if I hadn't we wouldn't have seen them coming. They would have been able to sneak up on us as we were coming up the hill and do God knows what to us. The first one I noticed was an adult male with a baseball bat. He actually had opened our car door and was rifling through things in our car trying to find a key, I'm guessing. There were about 8 people in total in the group, ranging from adults I would say in their 30s to teenagers and children no more than 12 or 13. They all had weapons, golf clubs, sticks, a cane and baseball bats. I yelled at the guy what the hell he thought he was doing going through our car, and my boyfriend came charging over the hill, bless his heart, right through the posse of creeps and weirdos who seemed to be lying in wait for us. It appeared that we had ruined whatever plans they had in mind because they immediately backed off. Some even tried to hide their weapons behind their backs, which was just stupid if you ask me. Who wouldn't notice a baseball bat behind somebody's back? The baseball bat guy demanded to know what we were doing there, and I demanded to know what the hell he thought he was doing in our car. He didn't answer, just looked at me all nervous. My ex-boyfriend said we were just admiring the architecture of the house and that we were just leaving, and they let us get into our car and drive off, which in itself was a miracle, I'd say, in light of what we had discovered on the property. They followed us in a black pickup, with no plates, for a good 20 minutes. Instead of heading for home, we went to the closest city, which was Baryon, filed a report with a policeman who seemed more shaken than us, and headed home. My ex never went back to that roofing job again. He had someone else finish it and he went to another one. I wanted to go back, but after telling people what happened I couldn't find anyone to go with me. My ex and I continued various explorations, but we both started carrying knives. I still carry one to this day even when I hike. I have not read of anyone else having similar experiences at Satan's Castle. Recently my cousin, who is also an explorer, contacted me with a place she wanted to explore. Guess where? And guess what? We have made arrangements to go there in the next couple of weeks. So on that note, and many years later, Satan's Castle cult, let's hope we don't meet again. And to any other urban explorers out there, please be careful. You never know what you might come across in these abandoned places. Story 7. A girl called Laura. When I was 10 years old, I lived in a relatively small town in Texas in a small house with my mom. My mom has always had a very caring heart for those in need. So when my uncle called her one night and told her he ran into a homeless girl at the local park, my mom offered to help her out for a day or so just to get her back on her feet. That sort of thing. When the girl arrived at my house, she said her name was Laura. Laura told us she was 16 at the time. She seemed like a shy girl. When my mother asked what she was doing out on the streets, Laura told us she had been kicked out of her home by her mom because her mom had accused her of sleeping with her boyfriend. Laura told us that allegation wasn't true. She told us her mother's boyfriend was the one who came on to her. My mom gave Laura a place to sleep in the guest bedroom that night. The next day, after breakfast, Laura asked to use my mom's house phone to call her mom to see if she could get some of her things from her mom's house. Laura's mom never answered the phone and we felt bad for her. As a 10-year-old girl, I couldn't imagine what she must have been going through. Later that day, I remember watching TV in the living room and minding my own business. But I could feel someone staring at me, so I turned my head where I felt the gaze. Laura has sending me a glare so cold that if looks could kill, I would have dropped dead. I was confused and a little startled. I turned my head away from her quickly and went back to watching TV, but I could still feel Laura's cold gaze. I couldn't understand what I had done to her to cause her to look at me with such hate. The next day it happened once more. I was in the kitchen getting a glass of water when I could feel someone looking at me. I turned my head to the side and saw Laura's head peering around the corner at me. Her eyes were dark and laced with hatred. It frightened me and I felt so confused as to why she was looking at me like this. I didn't want to cause any trouble, so I didn't bring up Laura's death glares to my mother at all. Later that night, my uncle had joined us for dinner. He had stopped by to see how everything was with Laura and if we had any luck finding her a place to live with one of her family members. After dinner, I was washing my plate in the sink when I heard a loud growling sound come from the dining room. I turned my head to see Laura shaking and growling like some sort of wild animal. My mom and uncle looked disturbed and worried. Laura threw herself onto the floor and began thrashing around and screaming as if she were possessed. I was absolutely terrified. It was a scary thing to witness. I grew up very religious. My mom and uncle began praying out loud for Laura while I ran to my room and closed the door. This went on for 2 hours, but it felt like an eternity of horror. I could hear Laura screaming like a mad woman and growling like some sort of deranged beast. I don't think any of us knew exactly what was going on. After my mom and uncle had prayed for Laura for what felt like forever, Laura told us she was free from an evil demon that had taken over her. None of us were sure what had caused her behavior. None of us were sure what had even happened. I peeked my head out of my room to see Laura smiling happily while she curled up on the couch with a blanket. Her eyes opened and she shot a cold glare at me. I quickly closed my bedroom door in fear. I placed a chair in front of my bedroom door and went to sleep. I was woken up the next morning by my mom waking me up. She told me that she was taking me out to eat at my favorite restaurant. When I asked her if Laura was going, she gave me a serious expression and spoke. "Your uncle is going to take Laura back to her mom's house. He slept on the couch last night after what happened. He and I were talking when the two of you had gone to sleep, and we pieced together that Laura made the entire performance up last night. She said, she is not stable and we think she's dangerous." As I heard my mother say those words, relief washed over me. I got dressed and went to the car to go to the restaurant with my mom. When we got into the car, we saw Laura and my uncle getting in his truck with her. Laura looked angry. Her expression was of a child's when you don't give them what they want. She got into my uncle's car and they drove away. I'm 22 now and I have never forgotten about this horrific incident that happened in my life years ago. After that day, I never saw Laura or heard anything else about her ever again. Story 8. Weirdo of the Wilderness. To give you some context, this occurred roughly 14 years ago when I was 12 years old and living in the east side Australian rainforest. When I say rainforest, our house was on a 40-acre property surrounded by bush. The house itself was owned by a Swiss man named Hans. Occasionally he would come down with his tractor and slash the long grass surrounding our house so we could access slightly more of the property in the summer. It was also extremely handy because if you know anything about Australia, it's that we have tons of beasties that can very easily kill you. We lived about a 40-minute drive from the small town center. This meant that if we needed groceries, medical attention, or to contact our parents, say while we were at school, it would be a 40-minute drive before anything could be done. The house sat on the side of a large mountain roughly 3/4 of the way up, so naturally most of the land we called home was strewn with valleys, nooks and hideaways. We had trails we could walk and they led to a stream and a small waterfall, 5-6 drop. It was a truly beautiful place but considerably scary to me and my small siblings, one brother and one sister slightly younger than me. We knew our neighbors on both sides of the property, but because the location of our house was pretty remote, our nearest neighbors were roughly a 10-minute drive away. One was a lovely old lady who used to wave to us when we got off the school bus before we made the trek to our house every day. I think our parents asked for her to keep an eye on us. The other was a middle-aged man and his family. He was a real jerk who excavated around the bottom border where our properties met and continuously interrupted the stream and waterfall's clear-flowing water supply. Lots of strange and creepy shit happens when you're living in the middle of nowhere, but one in particular involved a guy I certainly don't want to meet again. Being pretty removed from people, it was extremely rare that we ever got visitors we didn't know were coming. When people we didn't recognize turned up, it was usually because they were lost and needed directions. One day, though, a man in a ute came roaring down our driveway. I remember running inside to tell my dad someone weird was here. He immediately walked outside to see who this unwanted guest was. A little background about my dad: he is literally the most hardcore person you will ever meet. He has one leg after having it amputated earlier in his life after having an accident on a motorcycle while he was running from police. He was in the Navy and was brought up in a very strict household. He had grown up in a very rough part of Sydney's west, so he had some pretty shady contacts too. In short, he is someone you really wouldn't want to fuck with. I wouldn't be surprised if he had killed someone in his life prior to having kids. Anyway, my dad goes outside to see what all the commotion is about while my mum keeps us inside, being protective. The man has a large red fur dog in the back of his car that looks like a German Shepherd cross. It snarled at my dad but immediately cowered when this stranger told it to shut up. Our own dog Millie, renowned beast killer just for the record, was snarling and going ballistic whilst being chained up to the house. "Hi, my name is John." The way the man spoke was like he was a salesman, a really slick and smooth guy who on the outside seemed friendly but with the overtone of wanting something. My dad immediately responded with, "So what the fuck are you doing here then, John?" The man was taken aback, obviously not used to dealing with someone as hostile as my dad. They then talked for a while and I could hear my dad talking with a sense of confusion about whatever this man had to say. I did, however, overhear my dad say, "What the fuck are you thinking? Just call the cops." I found out later that the lovely old lady next to us had died. Apparently John was on the other side of her property and went to visit and found her dead. He also asked my dad if they should move the body to make it easier for police to investigate. This is obviously why my dad was telling the man to call the police immediately. Anyway, later that night the police showed up to take a statement from my dad and John, who was hanging around at our house until the police arrived. I remember my dad pulling an officer aside and explaining that John wanted to move the body when he first arrived. P.S. The reason I now know all this is from asking my mother at the time and my father some years later. The police left without any more questions as it looked like she had died from natural causes. John was still at our house. I found him to be a very unsettling person. The way he smiled, the dark of his eyes. He was unfamiliar but acting like he was one of us. I remember it was a school night and I was trying to watch TV and he was playing songs on his guitar with my mom and dad at the table. I was angry because he was ruining my shows and I told Mom I wanted him to go and that I thought he was weird. She smiled and told me she felt the same and told me I should go to bed. The next day things seemed normal, went to school, came home. Not seeing the familiar friendly face of the old woman stung a bit on my way past her house. It felt strange and I hoped that she knew her family loved her before she passed. I was a bit sad on the walk home, until halfway down the driveway I noticed John's Uda again parked out the front of our house. I walked closer and was greeted by his dog, Rusty. He walked outside with my dad and I heard him call Rusty to his car as he was leaving. Apparently he was borrowing tools from my dad. He left and waved goodbye like he was someone that I was going to miss. Again, that sense of over-familiarity made me feel uncomfortable. I didn't know this man, I didn't like this man, and I was hoping he would never come down our driveway again. My dad then pulled me aside and asked me what I thought of John. I labeled him a weirdo, and told my dad I was hoping he wouldn't come back. For the second night in a row, when John returned Dad's tools, he was sitting in our house playing guitar and annoying everyone. My mom and dad were visibly unimpressed by the situation. I heard my mom and dad argue about him hanging around until eventually my dad told him he needed to leave, as it was time for us to go to bed. He insisted it was early and tried to make an excuse to stay. I found that very odd. I was polite enough to know when someone didn't want me around, so why didn't this man? Or if he did know, why wouldn't he leave? After ushering him out, my mom and dad had a big talk in their room and my dad told us all that he didn't like John and that he was going to ask him not to come over anymore, and if we saw John again, immediately tell him. The next day was a Saturday, so we were going to blow up our cheap inflatable pool and go for a swim as it was getting pretty warm. Around 11 a.m. the sound of a car thundering down the driveway alerts me and I go outside. I run back inside to tell my dad that John is back. Just like the first time I ever laid eyes on John, my dad goes outside and we stay inside with my mum, watching and listening through a screen door. John again with his weird over-familiar smile and dark eyes greets my dad and is met with, "Look mate, I don't know who you think you are, but I don't want you coming around here anymore. You scare my kids and my wife and I don't want you to come back. You understand?" I didn't hear John's reply. From his tone it sounded like he was confused and tried to reason with my dad. Dad wasn't having it and told him to go or he would call the cops. As he was leaving, Dad said, "Don't come back or you'll be sorry." This is where things truly get weird. As my dad lays this subtle threat on the man, his face completely changes to one of rage. He glares at us in the house, sticks up his finger and speeds out on the driveway shouting profanities and churning up gravel, spraying it towards our house. My dad came back and told us we wouldn't be seeing John anymore, and if we did, we were going to call the police. I was relieved. This odd man made me feel uncomfortable in my own home, and the way he reacted when he left confirmed the feeling I got from him when I first saw him. I can't remember if it was the Sunday or the Monday after that day, but John did come back. He tried to reason with my dad and say sorry for whatever caused us to not like him. Before he even got out of the ute, my dad said, "If you don't turn around and leave, I'm going to smash your face in." He did just that. My dad then called the police to inform them of what happened. Apparently they were going to go and talk to John. I didn't hear any more of what happened to that conversation. A few weeks went by with no sightings or happening with John, and we all felt like things were back to normal. This was until our mailbox had been tipped out of the ground and smashed, or possibly run over. I remember asking my dad what happened, but he wasn't about to give me any ideas. He later told me that he knew it was John after the way their last conversation ended. The next weekend after the mailbox incident, we went into town to get groceries and a fast food dinner, as a bit of a treat, and when we came home down the driveway, my dad immediately stopped my mum from proceeding and said that something was wrong. Next to the carport where we parked our car, at the back of the house, there was a window that opened to the bathroom. My dad must have spotted the window was missing. As we drove down, he got increasingly more tense until we all noticed the window was missing. I remember being confused in the back seat, not really knowing what was going on. Until I saw it. A man, dark eyes, over-familiar, coming from the window that led to the shower. My dad was exploding with rage. He told my mum to rush down the driveway so we could fuck this guy up. The man proceeded to escape the window and run down the back of our property into thick lantana, a really thorny shrub-like plant. My dad, only being on one leg, let Millie loose as she was going ballistic tied up to the house. She raced down the lantana-engulfed hill into the darkness. She came back with nothing. My dad went out with his flashlight and couldn't find anything either. I'm not sure if anyone slept that night. None of our possessions had been stolen or even moved. We must have caught this man just as he was entering our house. The police came the next day and searched for fingerprints with no avail. My father was furious and again alerted them to John and his strange behavior. They told us they would look into it once again. That was the last time we heard from John that year. I had almost completely forgotten about him and had the summer off to enjoy myself and get ready for high school. The school I went to was pretty large considering where we were, but everyone seemed to know each other pretty well, including the teaching staff. Within my first week at the school, we were introduced to all the teachers and teacher aides. I was caught completely unaware when that over-familiar dark-eyed man from the previous year was reintroduced as a teacher aide. Except instead of John, he was introduced as Gregory something. I went into a little bit of a spin as I was trying to make sense of it all. I was 100% sure that this man named Greg was the same man who had introduced himself to my family as John. At that moment, so many things rushed into my head. What if he killed the old lady? What if he didn't live close by? What if he wanted to move the body so he could frame my dad? If he lied about something as critical as his name, what else was he lying about? What if the police never even made contact with him? I was sitting there for a good 10 minutes trying to piece it together until the teacher called my name to bring me back to reality. That is when he noticed me. The look on his face when he saw mine was one I'll never forget. He immediately recognized me. He looked shocked, his eyes were wide, and he said nothing. Just staring. I had just found out his dirty little secret. I could sense that he was now the one feeling uncomfortable and on edge. Later that day, I rushed home to tell my dad who I had found. He was shocked and repeatedly asked if I was sure. He went to the school the next day and discovered the man had put in for indefinite leave yesterday and may not return. When we learned of the news, my dad told me to watch out and let him know should John or Greg ever return. So John, Greg, whoever you are, let's not meet again. Story 9. King Henry of Park Lane. Back in the late 2000s, I had just finished up my useless degree and was struggling to find work. I was living in a Midwestern college town where everyone and their dog had some higher level of education, so it wasn't uncommon to find people with PhDs working for $10 an hour as a cashier, but the town was cute and affordable, so people liked to stay post-graduation. I found a decent job at a coffee shop over the summer, but once the fall semester started, my hours were cut and I was replaced with cheaper, younger baristas. A coworker suggested I try nannying. I wasn't particularly interested in working with kids, but she assured me it was good money, and so I decided to join a website for nannies and babysitters and very quickly was contacted by a family. I met the parents for a quick interview and was hired fairly quickly. The pay was excellent and the hours were great. 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., so I had the evenings to myself and free weekends. Both parents were professors at the local university and they had 2 children and were expecting their third very soon. Henry was 8 and Jane was 3. Both children were incredibly intelligent, Jane particularly so, and had the vocabulary of a much older child. I was primarily responsible for her, since Henry spent most of the day in school. Jane was a very serious little girl. She could carry on very in-depth conversations, and I used to joke with her mom that she was like a 60-year-old trapped in a toddler's body. Henry was a beautiful kid. I'll give him that. He had thick dark curly hair, long eyelashes, piercing blue eyes and dimples. He has the ability to be sweet, loving and funny, but I quickly learned this was a skill set he only used when it benefited him. Overall, Henry was a true monster. I have an older brother and 2 younger brothers, so I'm familiar with sibling relationships and I know fighting is normal. However, Henry tormented Jane. I've never seen a child get so much joy out of causing pain, fear, and discomfort to another human being. He loved nothing more than to terrify her with stories or monsters or ghosts. He had convinced Jane that there was a demon living in their basement and she refused to go down with me when I had to do laundry. Over a couple of weeks I had slowly got her to sit on the bottom step and play while I folded clothes so I could keep an eye on her. She was so proud of her bravery, but when Henry came home and saw she had conquered her fears, he made it his duty to terrify her even more, and all progress was lost. He was so terribly mean to his little sister, I was worried about her physical safety when he was home. He would constantly taunt her, pinch her, threaten her, and destroy her belongings. I despised the hour I had with him every evening after picking him up from school. The entire time would be filled with crying and screaming and his refusal to obey. I would try to tell him off occasionally. I'd say he couldn't act however he wished, that he was a child, I was the adult, etc. "You aren't the king of this castle, Henry." This is something my parents used to say to me. "I am the king. I'm King Henry. Off with your head." He had responded, and he was right. I didn't have any less control over him than his parents. They, let's call them Elizabeth and Michael, were absolutely clueless. Dad was work-obsessed and incredibly hands-off. Mom was a sweetheart but also a doormat and allowed both kids to walk all over her. They had no discipline whatsoever. So a lot of Henry's behaviors made sense. Why would he need to behave if no one ever made him? I was shocked to watch how Henry treated his mother and how she allowed him to mock her, call her names, and act aggressively towards her. It wasn't unusual for him to tell her she looked ugly and needed to go change or put her hair down, and she'd go and do it. He's threatening to punch her stomach if she didn't do what he wanted. He'd pinch her in the back of her arms when she displeased him. She made excuse after excuse for his behavior, calling him exceptionally bright and bored and having a difficult time adjusting to her pregnancy. When the baby was born, things got even worse. Thankfully, he didn't attempt to hurt baby Peggy, but his aggression and violence towards his mother and Jane got so much worse. One afternoon, he found his mom sewing needles and tried to trick Jane into sitting on one. When it didn't work, he stuck one right into her tiny arm. She screamed, and I freaked out and removed it and called both parents ASAP. Elizabeth arrived home, concerned for Jane, and for the first time seemed at least frustrated by Henry's behavior. She attempted to scold him, and he became so enraged he started punching her in her newly postpartum stomach. She only responded by crying and hugging him and asking him why he was so angry and wanted to hurt his sister. He responded with a cold, "I'm angry because you should have miscarried them both. They both should have died inside you." My jaw hit the floor. Elizabeth stopped crying and just stared at him and then me. I assumed they were going to potentially get this kid some help, but when I approached the subject the next day, I was brushed off and told that they had a talk with Henry and it was just an outburst due to an unrelated issue at school. Another excuse. Henry continued to torment the entire family, and he started to target me as well. For the past few months, he mostly ignored me. He occasionally called me ugly or threw the laundry I had just folded all over the room, but he had yet to get physical with me. This changed one day where unfortunately he had the day off from school, so I got to spend the entire day with him home while also caring for Jane and Peggy. It was challenging, but by 10 a.m. he was bored of torturing Jane and went to go play in his room. The rest of the morning went decently with him occupied in his room until lunch, where he spilled his plate all over the table because I didn't cut his crust the right way. I cleaned it up. I had admitted my defeat weeks ago. I couldn't enforce any rules or boundaries if the parents didn't back me up. I put the girls down for a nap, and Henry asked me to read him a story. For the first time, he was calm and genuinely sweet with me. I read him the BFG, and he cuddles a bit closer. I thought for a bit, maybe this kid just really needs more one-on-one time. I was about 30 minutes into the book when I felt a small hand reach under my shirt and touch my stomach. I looked at him, and he stared at me. I gently picked up his hand and told him it wasn't appropriate to touch other people without asking. He seemed angry but let me continue reading. I noticed that he had stopped paying attention to the story and was looking at me all over. Before I could ask him what was wrong, his hand was under my shirt and making its way for my breast when I yanked it away and stood up. I tried not to yell, told him that was incredibly inappropriate and that he's never to touch anyone underneath their clothes ever again. Henry looked at me and said, "I can touch whoever I want, wherever I want, whenever I want. You can't stop me and no one can stop me." I was creeped out and felt violated. I know he was a child, but just imagine how that feels as an adult woman. I know children aren't the best with personal space boundaries, but Henry was almost 9 and I knew he knew what he did wasn't appropriate or okay. The intent behind it seemed sinister. I ended our story session and tried to get through the rest of the day. I was so glad he'd be back in school for the rest of the week. I did decide to let his mother know, because it felt weird to not. She thought it was funny. She kind of chuckled and said he is a very sensory-oriented kid and was just trying to be affectionate. At that point I honestly decided that I was never going to talk sense into these parents and I needed to look for another job. I knew I was going to put my 2 weeks in pretty soon. I was very sad, because I was close to Jane and Peggy and felt like I was abandoning them, but I had discussed Henry's behavior with my roommate and she was concerned about potential legal ramifications for me if Henry did something to one of the girls on my watch. I came back to work on Monday and Jane had a black eye. Henry had accidentally punched her in the eye during an argument. I was so sad for her. I asked her what happened later and she told me that she was playing in her room when Henry came in, took her doll, and when she tried to grab it back he punched her square in the eye and laughed. Henry was so evil at home and I wondered why his teacher never seemed to mention any behavioral issues in the classroom. One evening while picking her up I mentioned Henry was very difficult at home and wondered if she had issues with him at school. She said no, that he was very well behaved, had no issues and had a lot of friends. I was very surprised. I assumed Henry was disturbed and that his poor behavior transferred into class, but the teacher denied this. I frankly didn't believe her, so one afternoon the girls and I left early and arrived at his school so I could see how he interacted. She was right. He sat at his desk quietly, raised his hand, and seemed genuinely friendly to his peers. For some reason this stark difference in Henry's personality from home to school terrified me even more. Initially I thought he was just a disturbed kid, but at that moment I realized how truly in control he was. Henry wasn't just an angry child with severe behavioral issues. Henry was just a mean child who knew when and where he could get away with his favorite pastime, causing misery. Thankfully I managed to find an entry-level position in a field related to my degree in the spring. I have my 2 weeks and Elizabeth was upset but understood. Henry, however, was livid. He made sure to tell me daily how much he hated me and how glad he was that I was leaving and how he hoped I died. I was feeling less than patient with his antics, so sometimes replied a little more sarcastically than I should have to a 9-year-old child. On my last day, a Friday, my treat to Elizabeth and Michael was to let them have a date night. I picked Henry up from school at 2:55 and we headed home. Henry refuses to talk to me. He wouldn't look at me. He wouldn't acknowledge me. I thought that may not be the worst way to spend the next 6 hours. We arrived home and shortly after Elizabeth and Michael came in and started to get ready for the date. The baby was about 5 months old at this point and they hadn't been out since her birth the fall before. Henry refused to speak to anyone. Elizabeth got worried and thought about canceling the date, not wanting to see Henry upset, but I, wrongly, assured her things would be fine and they left around 6 p.m. The older two went to bed around 8 p.m. and the baby an hour before, so I only had to make it about 2 more hours with Henry. We ordered pizza, but he refused to eat. He just sat there and sulked in his chair. I let them watch about 30 minutes of the Magic School Bus on my laptop, a treat since they didn't own a TV, while I bathed the baby, gave her a bottle and put her down in her crib. I was surprised I didn't hear a peep coming from downstairs. No crying or screaming. I felt a bit victorious that Henry was so stubborn in his silent treatment that he didn't realize how easy he was making this evening. When I got into the living room, I noticed Henry had a sly grin on his face. The first one I'd seen all day. I let the episode finish and I took the computer and noticed it was incredibly sticky. I quickly realized it was honey and that Henry had gone into the kitchen and put a solid glop in his hands and rubbed it all over the bottom and back of the computer. I was just relieved he didn't get the keyboards. I took the keyboard into the kitchen, wiped it off and then heard Jane scream. I ran into the living room and Henry sat there with Jane right next to him with her hands squeezed tightly with his right hand and one of the kitchen knives in the other hand. I froze. I demanded he put the knife down immediately and let his sister go. I told him this wasn't funny and he's crossed a line. He just smiled. I went and grabbed Jane and she cried and Henry chuckled. I really scared you. You know, I could have killed her while you were upstairs and you would have never known. The blood drained from my face. The anger I felt towards him turned into fear and then realization that he was right. I felt so stupid. I rarely left them alone together because it usually ended in Jane being pinched, pushed, slapped or bit, but I guess I let my guard down given his docile behavior all day. I just started to cry and screamed at him to never ever do that again and go straight to his room. He sat and stared and went to the kitchen and put the knife back and then went upstairs. I was obviously super shaken up and was still trying to calm down as I bathed Jane and got her easy for bed. I told her I was sorry and asked if he had hurt her, and she said he had not. I was about as angry with myself as I was at him. I could see Henry in his room playing with his Hot Wheels set, and I told him he needed to have the lights out by 8:30 and that he could tuck himself in. He stared at me and shut the door to his room, and I prayed that would be the last time I saw him for the night. I got Jane into bed and was reading her a story when I heard his door creak. I got up, and it looked as if he had cracked the door but the lights were off. I continued reading until I suddenly heard Peggy start to gently cry, but she sounded close. I sprung up and outside the door frame I could see Henry holding the baby over the banister. I couldn't even scream. I've never moved so fast in my life. I got to Peggy and grabbed her and just ran back into Janie's room. I shut the door and shouted at Henry, asking him why he would do this, which was a stupid question. Anyway, to torment me, to make me realize how easily he could access his younger sisters and potentially hurt them. Henry could have dropped Peggy, and he could have hurt Jane with that knife, but he didn't, and I don't think that was ever his intention. He just wanted to let me know I wasn't doing my job nearly as well as I thought and that in the end, he was the one always in control. It took a while to calm down myself and the girls and get them to sleep. It was close to 9 by the time I left their bedrooms as I saw that Henry was still up in his room reading on his bed. I just kind of looked at him. I was so relieved that this was my last day dealing with this kid and his bullshit, but I felt sad and scared for his sisters. I told him it was time for bed and that I was going to tell his parents about what had happened. He didn't respond. I turned out the lights and then I heard him call my name. You can tell them, but it's a waste of your time. You're just lucky. You're really lucky. I can do what I want. I can hurt who I want. I can touch who I want. You are all really lucky. I just shut his door and left. Elizabeth and Michael came home a little later than expected and paid me. I didn't mention what had happened that night because it did feel pointless, but the next day I ended up sending a text. I got a long response from Elizabeth full of excuses about Henry, and she even insinuated I lied. I was over it. I was over them. I did end up contacting CPS, but not sure if anything ever came of it. I don't believe Henry was being abused. I've told this story to others and people always ask me that, but no. I think Henry was born a sociopath and his parents were enablers who never made him accountable for his actions, and the two together created a monster. I didn't hear from them for over a decade. I moved across the country, got married, and now I have kids. My son is almost 6 years old and he has 2 little sisters that are 3. They fight, but he loves them and is so protective and knows what a healthy relationship between siblings looks like. Anyways, a few weeks ago I got a friend request on FB from Elizabeth. She looks the same, a few more lines but still very elegant and pretty. Her profile picture consists of herself and her, now, 4 children. I glanced across the photo until my eye caught a young man with thick curly hair and bright blue eyes. Henry. Henry ended up as stunning looking as expected. He is about to be a sophomore at a well-known elite American university. He plays for their soccer team and is majoring in business. He has a girlfriend and seems popular in his fraternity. This is all that I can gather through his public FB posts. Maybe he learned accountability and grew out of his mean-spirited and manipulative way. I can only hope that's true for his siblings' sake, as well as the well-being of those around him. For now my family is thousands of miles away from you, Henry. I honestly don't care if we meet again. I handled you before and I can handle it again. However, be it now or 20 years in the future when my children are out on their own trying to find a place in the world. If you see them, don't fucking touch them. Story 10. Crazy Beauty Queen Stalker. This is a long story, as it's been over 5 years in the making. I've actually posted this story before, but there are some really good internet sleuths here on Reddit, and they were able to figure out ex-beauty queen's identity and mine too. I don't really care if I give up my identity but didn't want it to be on my actual account, so I deleted it a while back. The catalyst for me to repost it today on a throwaway is that it's cathartic. Last week, yet another court date for ex-beauty queen stalker came and went. We'd been expecting things to proceed with her entering a plea of guilty or not guilty, but no such luck. All we got was another vague reason as to why she's not ready and a new court date issued, months from now. There have been many court dates since she has been arrested. It's been over 18 months since she's been arrested for her continued stalking and harassment, and she still wants to drag things on, to seemingly try and stay relevant in our lives. As an aside, the amount of court resources and taxpayers' money that's wasted is actually really astounding. Anyway, on to the story. To recap, my husband dated a beauty queen title holder of a well-known pageant before me. They broke up long before we met. She was a statuesque blonde, very tall, a knockout in her day, in my opinion. This is somewhat important to the story, I guess. But while she was a dazzling pageant winner on the outside, on the inside, oh boy. She could be charming and beautiful if she needed you, but mostly, she treated people around her terribly, including my husband, and he eventually broke it off with her. But she never went away. She would continue to call and email repeatedly, even after my husband and I met. If anything, her calls increased. She would call over and over again, day and night, even after my husband, then boyfriend, blocked her number. She would ask for money, and threatened to go to the police claiming he abused her if he didn't give it to her. He obviously did not give her money. This made her very upset. The threats increased and became more malicious. But when that didn't work, she would switch tactics and try and sweetly ask him for help with certain projects she was trying to get off the ground, or more accurately, have him do the work for her and she take the credit, with the promise that, if he did just this one last thing for her, she would go away. He did not reply. So she would go back to being malicious. Any tactic for attention, or for what she really wanted, money. My husband was terrified. Because of course, while he never did anything to her, it would be her word over his, and he was terrified of ruining his reputation and career. We unfortunately ended up at an event she also attended. She had been waiting for us to arrive and had placed herself near the entrance of the event. As we walked in, she stood across the room, looking me up and down, laughing and whispering into the ear of her date, making a point to try and make me uncomfortable. But that was okay. She was easily ignored until she ambushed me as I came out of the bathroom. She had clearly been waiting for a moment when I was alone. She towered over me, she is very tall. I had no intention of having it out with her, and as I hurriedly walked to find my husband, but she kept pace beside me, hunched over. So she was at my eye level, I'm 5 feet 5 inches, her head turned towards me. She was like a caricature of herself as she ambled beside me, smiling maniacally. "Where is your man?" she hissed in her heavy accent. Her eyes were black. She looked like out of a Tim Burton movie, hunched over with that crazy demonic smile. "Watch your back, Pug," she added, grinning. She liked to call me names like Pug because I own pugs, and I guess she thought this was an insult. What I didn't know then was while I was in the bathroom, she had walked over to my husband and had thrown her arm around him while he was in mid-conversation with someone, and introduced herself to the man he was talking to, as if she and my husband were together. My husband unwrapped himself from her clutches and told her to beat it. She then beelined and waited for me to come out of the washroom. We stopped going to the parties. The last time we ran into her was at a funeral for a mutual friend. She followed me around at the wake. As my husband, boyfriend at the time, was talking to the man's widow, I was talking to a friend and his wife. She walked right up and stood with us, joining us mid-conversation as if she were part of the group. It was unnerving but also just bizarre. It was a funeral and I did not want a scene. I silently picked my wine glass off the bar and walked away, leaving her with the couple I had been speaking to, and her staring at me with a smirk on her face. All in all, annoying but manageable. However, the calls never stopped. She would call my husband over and over, day and night, even though he had long blocked her number. She would drive by. I found my car keyed one night after I left it outside, but obviously I couldn't prove it's her. But enough was enough. My husband had a lawyer send a cease and desist. After the first, she called him from a private number. He answered and she said, "Hi E, "It's me," in a sing-song voice like they were the best of friends and he hadn't just sent her a lawyer's letter ordering her to stay away from him and his family. He said nothing and hung up. Another cease and desist was sent. Then a third. Nothing would make her go away. She did not actually think my husband was capable of not wanting to be with her, because her beauty. Eventually though, she got pissed that he was not giving in. So, she decided to take this rage to the internet. I knew that she was absolutely checking out my social media, but I don't really use it much, so I didn't care. However, she created a fake Twitter account and tweeted, "Husband's name is a fraud," and tagged his colleagues, friends, investors, family members. Every single person she could think of to try and ruin his reputation and career. On New Year's Eve, she posted on my Instagram account at exactly 12:01 a.m. "Happy New Year's, scrubs." Social media settings were all put to private. We went to the police armed with the emails threatening to give her money or she would go to the police. She was charged with 2 counts of harassment and a restraining order was put into place. To our shock, the next day after her arrest, our phones were buzzing. This story had made front-page news, clearly a slow news day. Her day in court came, right before COVID. We arrived at the courthouse and sat down. She walked in. We were shocked by her appearance. Actually, shocked is an understatement. She was unrecognizable from her former self. Gone was the statuesque, dazzling blonde. She had apparently shaved her head and was wearing a short, ratty brown wig. She had gained about 80 pounds, give or take, and was now sort of hunched. With her height and new girth, she looked like a linebacker. To add to her new look, she wore a bulky brown men's overcoat and a scarf tied over her wig, like a babushka. My immediate thought was, her outside now matches her inside. But it was her eyes that I noticed the most. About a year earlier, we had shown a photo of her to our kids so that if she ever approached them, they knew to run. At the time, my son, who was young, commented that she had mean eyes. From the mouth of babes. Maybe it was that she had changed so much physically overall, but her dark eyes had narrowed into deep, black slits. As she scanned the courtroom and saw us in court, she would turn around every so often to look back at us and glare. She would then whisper in her lawyer's ear and laugh as if she were having a grand time. She had a pair of big, round, cheap sunglasses that she would put on and take off intermittently. When she addressed the judge, she put them on, and he asked her to remove them. We thought she was putting on a brave face and treating it all like a joke, but we were about to find out that getting arrested wouldn't slow her down. The restraining order didn't seem to faze her at all. If anything, angered her more. From then on, every day, night and day, she would post from multiple fake social media accounts, posting photos of myself, of my husband. She would put up my husband's photo with the caption, "pedophile," or other terrible names that included racist and transphobic comments and captions. To give you a slight idea, she posted altered pictures of my husband, photoshopped to look like he was wearing heavy makeup and referring to him as a pre-op transgender. She posted altered and unflattering photos of myself. She called me old, ugly. Those are the G-rated ones. Listen, I am no beauty queen myself. The name-calling, while obsessive and gross, wasn't what bothered me most. Although I'm not going to lie, seeing hundreds of photos of myself on her fake Twitter account calling me ugly and obsessively pointing out every single perceived flaw did succeed in getting me down at times. Why did I keep looking? Because it was like getting a glimpse into her unraveling/unraveled mind, just in case it was a clue of what she was capable of or thinking of doing next. Because it wasn't her insulting posts that fazed me. What bothered me most were the sinister captions, "Keep an eye on your kids because I am watching," or "Why don't you plant some flowers in your front yard?" or "Be good to your kids because you never know what could happen. How was your Uber Eats order?" She would post pictures of me with an arrow directed to my head, which I perceived to be a gun to my heart. She posted pictures of my husband's workplace, which she was not allowed to be within 2 blocks of, in accordance to the restraining order, but the police said this could be just a picture she took from the internet. She posted Agatha Christie quotes like, "Every killer is usually someone you know well," or "Your end is near." Her Twitter profile banner picture was taken from a movie poster and said, "Stalker," like she was in on the joke. We called the police again, but they said there wasn't anything they could do since she didn't explicitly tag us. I took screenshots of everything. Many of her posts were nonsensical, but most were photos posted of us on this fake account, all altered with derogatory or ominous captions. But we couldn't get her shut down. I became anxious anytime my kids were outside shooting hoops in the driveway. My elderly mother wouldn't take the baby out in the stroller. She was too scared. It affected all of our lives. Life became dramatic. The ex-beauty queen would taunt us with, "Catch me if you can." She posted close-ups of her dog's genitals, or a piece of her dog's shit with my name beside it, the implication obvious. It bothered me that she now had a dog, since I didn't think someone like her was capable of caring for anything living. Then the calls started back up, this time to our home line. Yes, we still have a home phone, bitch, and then a hang-up. Karma will get you, and then weird chants-like calls, as if she were reciting a spell. Sure enough, she posted photos of a pentagram and candles, as some sort of altar and the caption, "Ring ring." Finally, the police asked us to come in and give video statements. We gave them a drive containing thousands of screenshots of posts she had made. They arrested her again and charged her with 2 more counts of criminal harassment. My husband was angry at this point, but as Mama Bear, I just wanted to get this over with. She mentioned the kids frequently and ominously many times in her online rants, also calling them rude names, which I won't repeat here because these are the things that upset me most. The judge also issued a social media ban for her. By the time she was rearrested for the second time, her fake Twitter account, which was literally mostly insults or references to my family, had 16,000 tweets in a 3-month period. She has no followers, so they were just to herself. The porn sites I had been continuously being tagged on stopped. Things quieted down tremendously. But I still get follower requests that I believe are her. But at this point we were all on edge. I kid you not, I felt weird walking into my kitchen at night to make a sandwich, feeling creeped out that she was outside watching. I put nothing past her, as nothing is more dangerous than a desperate woman who has nothing to lose. Which, by the way, was one of the quotes she posted. I don't know what is wrong with her. I believe, from what I've researched, she is a malignant narcissist. Perhaps some other mental issues are at play here, but I can say she was a terrible person long before she decided to try and make our lives miserable. Crazy beauty queen turned stalker, I would love nothing more than to never meet again. But if going to court helps you stay away from us forever, then bring it. As an aside, I wanted to mention that we heard from a reliable source that after my husband broke up with her, she allegedly became known to police for other reasons. While my husband dodged a bullet regarding her threats to go to police saying he abused her, apparently other men have not been so lucky. Since I can't post pictures, I'll leave you with one of her posts, one that may not make much sense, but to us, it was a statement to let us know she enjoys this drawn-out court process. Many of her posts are in her native language, so this is translated. Violent women, and the cruelest, never answer questions. They like to continue the misunderstanding indefinitely. So I seek to contact people only in order to torment them. My cruelty is my last attachment to the world, and my last chic. Story 11. Former park ranger. A few years ago my friend Tez and I set out on a great American road trip. We were going to drive from New York to Los Angeles, zigzagging through the country for 6 weeks. We were both in our early 20s, pretty broke, and as my mom had been a long-haul trucker, I suggested that to save a ton of money we should sleep in the back of our hatchback. It was a pretty cozy setup. We bought some blankets and sheets at Goodwill and cut one of them up to make curtains. By the end of the first week we'd gotten so we could set up camp in about 10 minutes, luggage moved to the front, curtains up, bedding laid down and out for the night. We slept in parking lots, free campsites, rest areas, basically anywhere it seemed safe and semi-legal. There was never a night, after the first night, where we felt scared, until the last week of the trip, in Arizona. We were near Flagstaff and had gotten pretty used to our routine. We didn't go on a set schedule and would never drive more than 3 or 4 hours a day. With no destination really in mind, outside a few must-see landmarks, we drive to places we found the night before on Google and take suggestions from other campers, locals, and people we met. We'd also gotten very good at making friends. We went to Denny's with a group of rednecks we met at a campsite. In the back of their pickup, Because I got hungry and overheard them saying they were going to go, we met an 80-year-old cowboy who took us out drinking and taught us to line dance at a country bar. Hope you're still kicking, Grandpa Mac. Played the guitar with some musicians in the middle of a thunderstorm. Got fed breakfast and dinner by tons of campers who invited us to hang out with them. Spent the 4th of July with a family who basically adopted us into their campsite. Grandma gave us some weed candy. Basically, every encounter we had with a stranger was a positive one. This night didn't look to be any different. We found a free campsite on Google and drove up into the woods, following our GPS. We were pretty far out of town and something seemed a little bit off when we pulled up to the campsite. There was one RV parked and 2 cars further up in the trees. We pulled up near the RV and a man opened the door. Tez waved hello and he just stared at her. His expression was completely blank. Then, as if she hadn't said anything, he just slowly closed the door again, staring at us the entire time. Figuring he just wanted some privacy and thought we'd be obnoxious, we pulled further down the road and found a flat spot to park the car. Instead of our usual routine of setting up camp immediately while it was still light out, we goofed around for a while, smoking and laughing and taking dumb photos of ourselves. Tez pointed out a campfire further down the campsite and we decided to go be friendly. We'd met so many cool people in the previous 5 weeks by just going up and offering beer or just chatting. So we wandered over. Near the campfire there were 2 men, the owners of the cars we'd seen earlier. They seemed friendly and we sat down to chat with them. They were drinking and smoking and we sat down and had a beer with them. One of the men seemed pretty off, and we came to find out that the 2 of them didn't actually know one another. The older man was definitely on some sort of drugs. He was spinning in circles and talking about UFOs, however, he seemed harmless. This left us chatting with the younger man, who claimed to be a former park ranger. He was handsome and easygoing, and we spent several hours just chatting about our trip, families, everything. Then he started talking about the bear. He'd seen a bear earlier in the forest. Tez didn't believe him and he pulled out his camera to show her photos of the bear. It was very close to the campsite, and we both were a little freaked out. It wasn't unheard of for one of us to get up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, so the idea of a bear hanging around in the night spooked us. The ranger just laughed, and then his expression changed completely. It's hard to describe, but his voice seemed somehow cold. He said, "If you get out of your car in the middle of the night, it's not a bear you should be worried about." I kept waiting for the laugh, or for him to nudge Tez with his elbow. Jokes on the foreigner and the city girl, right? He never did. I laughed awkwardly and made a dumb joke about serial killers in the woods. My friend laughed as well and joked about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. We moved on to another subject, but within 5 minutes the ranger had come back to it and was talking about something grabbing us from our car in the middle of the night. No matter how we tried to steer the conversation away from serial killers, he kept latching back on. The older man was high as a kite at this point and was staring at the stars, not talking. We just awkwardly laugh and sip our beer and try to get the conversation going somewhere else. Then the ranger stood up and walked towards the cooler to get another beer. At this point it's pitch black out, and I can't see anything outside the circle of light from the campfire. The beer cooler was outside of that circle. Suddenly there is a red dot in the darkness, and it took a moment for me to realize that it's a camera. The ranger is holding a camera. He had taken a photo of us. I could see the screen on the digital camera lit up. Now, it wasn't odd for the people we met to ask to take pictures with us. My friend Tez is gorgeous, dark hair, blue eyes like a young Megan Fox, and we were friendly. People like having pictures of themselves. It was an entirely strange thing to have this person taking a photo of us, without asking, or even indicating that that's what he was doing. We were both staring at him like deer in the headlights at this point, but instead of realizing what he's doing is a bit weird, he checks his camera, adjusts some things and takes another photo. This time with the flash. No asking us to smile, no proposing a group photo, and no explanation. After this photo he comes back to the fire and sits down. Not a word said about the photo. At this point me and Tez are mutually freaked out. We make some BS excuse that we need to go set up our campsite and nope the hell out. When we stand to leave, the UFO guy smiles and says to have a good night. Ranger, however, looks at us with a smile that doesn't reach his eyes and says, "Be careful out there, there's more than bears in the woods." Every hair on my body stood on end. I wasn't alone in my discomfort either because Tez laughed a response out and pulled me away from the campfire towards our car. We rush back to the car, which we only found in the dark by referencing the RV, and jump in the front seats. My friend Tez is all but hyperventilating. Why did he take pictures of us? I was shaking. I responded. I read that serial killers sometimes warn their victims. She stared at me for a second and locked the car doors. Do you think he just took victim photos of us? We both freaked out. She's in a full panic and turns the headlights on in the car. I immediately yell at her to turn them off, because now he knows exactly where our car is. God knows why, but that is the only night we'd not set up camp. We didn't need to tear anything down, so we just put the car in drive and floored it out of the campsite. As we got onto the dirt road, Ranger was walking towards our car with that same cold expression. Ranger, let's not meet. Ever again. Story 12. Laughing in the woods. I went camping with 3 of my buddies, John, Bennett and Kyle. We do this every year, kind of a bro trip to reconnect with each other. We were all fresh out of college and decided to go on our yearly camping trip in August. We are from Oregon and ended up camping in the woods there like we usually do at the same spot. The first day was great. We set up our spot, explored the area, and by the time the sun was setting, we set up a campfire and made dinner. After a few too many beers and some s'mores, we decided to go to sleep. It was a perfect end to a perfect day. Our second day was basically the same thing. Hiking, food, 1 too many beers, but this night ended up being not so perfect. I remember watching a Mr. Nightmare video about some guys camping and they heard laughing and it turned out it was nobody in their group. Yeah. My story is similar. As we finished the rest of the beers, we were wrestling around with each other like guys do. Then John stopped messing around and froze. Everyone was confused, but John claimed he heard something nearby. I told him it was most likely a squirrel and he said, no. It was most definitely not. He was scarring me at this point, so I decided to resume the tackling session and I took him down. We forgot about the whole thing until about 10 minutes later. We were tired from wrestling and joking around, so we decided to put out the fire and head into the tent. We had a 6-person tent for anybody wondering, so we were all in one tent. Just as our only light source, besides our flashlights, went out, I heard a slight cackle. I assumed it was one of the boys because we were all clearly a bit buzzed, so everything is funny. I wanted to see what was so funny, so I turned the flashlight directly onto Bennett's face. I thought he was the one laughing. Bennett's face was as white as a ghost. He looked at me and said, "Did you guys hear that?" I said, "The laughing?" And Kyle said, "That wasn't you?" We were all shaken and decided to go into the tent. As we got into the tent, I pulled out an axe that I used to cut the wood. It was the only source of protection we had. I was on the very end of the tent with Kyle and John in the middle and Bennett on the other end. We were all silent, but I knew we were all wide awake after hearing the laughter. We weren't exactly at an actual campsite where there were other people around. We just walked into the woods, found an open spot and set up camp there. We were about a mile from our car with barely any cell signal. So I guess you could say we weren't exactly in the safest position if there was a crazy maniac running around. I got tired, so I dozed off. I have no idea how long I was sleeping before I heard laughing again. It's hard to describe other than it sounded menacing. I was frozen. I didn't move. I didn't even try to look over to see if my buddies were awake. The axe was under my pillow. As I mustered up the strength to move to get the axe, I saw what looked like someone's finger pressed up against the tent, just circling around the tent. Someone was definitely outside, walking around our tent, laughing. When they got to the front part of the tent where the entrance was, they stopped. About 5 seconds went by before the person ferociously shook the tent and screamed, "Boogity boogity." That's when I knew my buddies were awake as well, because Kyle screamed like a little girl, and after he screamed, whoever was behind the tent laughed again and walked off. We laid there the rest of the night, wide awake and definitely sober. We didn't want to move out of pure fear that whoever was out there was still there. When the sun came up, we packed up everything and walked back to our car. We still go camping every year, but make sure to go to a legit camping site. I now bring a judge gun with me and not just an axe. Whoever was outside our campsite could have been a deranged homeless person, psychopath serial killer, meth head, or just an asshole playing a prank on us, but I sure as hell won't camp in a rural place anymore. Stay safe out there. It's a dangerous world we live in. Story 13. Saddle Shoes. This story is technically my mom's, but it's somewhat affected my siblings and me as well. My mom grew up in South Florida, and this started during the early 70s. She was a senior in high school, and she met a guy at a wedding. He was the drummer in the wedding band, a few years older than her, and therefore he was the cool, mysterious guy that many girls her age dreamed of. They immediately hit it off, and he commented on her saddle shoes she was wearing at the time. She gave him her home phone number, and I believe they maybe went on 1 or 2 dates and everything seemed totally fine. He would regularly call the house and she would sit on the kitchen floor and talk to him. One night, their phone conversation took a weird turn. He started asking her things like, "Have you ever thought about killing yourself?" And, "Do you ever think about murdering people?" Obviously, she was shocked at this and got very uncomfortable and completely stopped talking to him. This is the last she heard from him. Or so she thought. It was 2012, and I had just graduated from college. I was hanging out in my college town to finish out my lease and work and figure out my next move. My mom calls me and says something weird has been going on. She tells me she's received a letter from this man she knew in high school. I had no idea about this guy, as she had never mentioned him at all to me, my siblings, or my dad. She explains to me who this man is and how she knew him, but hadn't spoken to him since that one uncomfortable phone call. The letter said something like, "I see you're really happy and married with kids," etc., but he goes on to mention each of us by name. He also mentions my dad's name and where he works. My parents met in college in another state, they quickly married, graduated college, and moved to yet another state. And then another state once my 2 sisters were born. She had no idea how he knew her new married name and address. She had never been on social media and once she had all of us kids, had stopped working. If you were to Google her name, you wouldn't find a thing. She then recalls getting a phone call from the Alumni Association at her college, telling her that a man had been calling on and off for months trying to get her contact information. But they weren't allowed to give out that information. She then tells me his name, and I remember having a Facebook friend request and a Twitter follow request from this man. My siblings all had them as well. My mom, having no social media like I mentioned, asked me to see if I could dig around his social media accounts and see what I could find. I found a music MySpace and a Reverb Nation page of some really terrible music he had recorded and uploaded. One of the songs was called Victoria, which is her name. All of the other songs had seemingly normal titles like Summer's Day, etc. I tell my mom this and she freaks out. I sent her the link and it's hard to make out the lyrics because the quality is so bad. But he mentions her saddle shoes, her beauty, etc. They literally hung out twice, 40 years ago. And these were songs that had been recorded pretty recently. I dig a little deeper and find out that he has made a website dedicated to freeing Amanda Knox, the woman accused of murdering her roommate in Italy. This was super alarming at the time, but I've since not put too much weight on that since her innocence is actually very possible. But it's still very strange. My dad didn't seem fazed by any of this, but my mom was freaked out and wouldn't stay home alone since this man knows their address. She ends up telling all of this to a family friend who is a private investigator, and he decides to do some digging on this guy. First of all, he's changed his last name. Secondly, he's moved to about 5 different states in the last 20 years under different aliases and working completely different jobs. There wasn't much that could be done since he never actually threatened my mom and he, somehow, didn't have a record. He still pops up every now and then with friend requests to my siblings and me, but other than that no one knows what his deal is. The fact that he's moved around quite a lot and changed his name is definitely a red flag. I personally think this dude is a serial killer. And if he's not, then he's just a sad, lonely, mentally unstable man and I hope he gets the help he needs. But stalker musician man / possible serial killer, let's please not meet, and please don't meet my mom again. Props if you stuck through this whole thing. I know it's not as creepy as most of the other stories on this sub, but I'm lucky enough that this is all I've got. TLD. Mom meets a psychotic man in the 70s. He resurfaces in 2012 to let her know he knows exactly where she lives and everything about her and has written creepy music about her. Story 14. Haven't been camping since. In May 2009, I had just broken up with my girlfriend of almost 3 years. We had moved from Calgary to Toronto, and were still stuck living together after the breakup as we didn't know many people in the city yet. Needless to say, the situation was pretty stressful and upsetting. So when a buddy I was going to school with at the time suggested a weekend camping/fishing trip, I jumped at the chance. He grew up in an area about an hour outside of Toronto called Flamborough. It's really beautiful. Loads of lush forest, farmers' fields, and small rivers and creeks. We decided to camp and fish along a creek called Grindstone Creek. It's close to some wetlands and the fishing is supposed to be great. We ended up setting up our camp in what was probably a farmer's field. I'm guessing it was trespassing on our part, bordered by a gorgeous forest. We spent the evening fishing, shooting the shit, and drinking some quality craft beers. As it got darker, we made a little fire and roasted potatoes and hot dogs. All in all, it was a really good night. We turned in just after midnight, and we shared a tent. My buddy fell asleep before me, and I stayed up playing on my phone until probably around 1:30. I must have drifted off because the next thing I remember was being woken up by a high-pitched yipping type noise. I was kind of groggy, and it took me a moment to fully wake up. The yipping was incessant and it sounded like a weird coyote. I laid there for a moment listening and then started playing on my phone again. The noise was annoying as hell. I tried ignoring it, but it sounded like it was getting closer. Finally, it sounded like it had to be no more than 10 feet from the tent. At this point, I was getting a little unsettled. I had seen coyotes in Calgary before and I thought of them as pretty harmless. They never looked much bigger than a smallish dog. But what if this one was rabid or something? What if it could smell our food? I have a pretty bad anxiety disorder, so I'm prone to worrying about these types of things. I nudged my buddy to see if he was awake, and he was. The noise woke him up too. We discussed what to do about the coyote, as we hadn't brought anything to scare off critters. Not a BB gun, nothing. Finally, he decided he would shine the flashlight on it and holler a lot, hopefully scaring him off. He unzipped the tent and I watched him pointing the flashlight out into the darkness. I'll never forget what happened next. His legs suddenly went all wobbly and he sort of stumbled backwards into the tent. He had a really dumbfounded look on his face when he looked at me and babbled, "It's not a coyote, it's a dude, it's some weird dude." Normally I would have thought he was messing with me. I'm a huge wimp and scared easily. I won't even watch horror movies, but I've never seen someone look that scared. And I never want to see that expression on someone's face again. So I knew he wasn't pulling my leg. The weird yipping and howling type noises were still going on, and in retrospect, it really didn't sound like a coyote, but I guess in our groggy states it was a way for our brains to make sense of it. Anyways, he kept telling me just to look out the tent flap, to make sure he's not crazy. At this point I was having a full-blown anxiety attack. My heart was racing, I felt like shit, but I had to look. So I slowly peeked out the flap and waited for my eyes to adjust, and that's when I saw him. He was standing only a few arms lengths away from the tent. He was swaying a little and wearing a baseball cap. What made it awful though, what was really creepy, was that he was wearing women's lingerie. That's when I knew there was most likely something very wrong with this guy, if the making high-pitched noises at a stranger's tent in the middle of the night didn't give it away. After I pulled my head back inside the tent, my buddy and I discussed what to do. Finally, we decided to yell at the guy to fuck off. My buddy started yelling, "Excuse me, can you fuck off? We're trying to sleep in here." The noise stopped, it was dead silent, and that's when we heard footsteps running towards our tent. They stopped right outside the tent, but we didn't waste any time. We started yelling again, "Seriously, fuck off. We have cell phones in here, if you don't fuck off we're going to call the cops." With that we heard him walk by the tent and head off, sounding like he was moving towards the road. Needless to say, we laid awake, petrified until the first sign of sunlight, then we hightailed it the hell out of there. We discussed our experience on the way home, and were both pretty embarrassed about how scared we got. It definitely was not manly on either of our parts. I think because we were both ashamed of how we let some weirdo freak us out so much, we really haven't ever talked about it since that day. So there you go. Here's my weird story. I'll always wonder what the hell that guy was doing out there, or what was wrong with him. Sometimes I wonder if things would have turned out differently if we were a couple girls. I'm not saying he was some serial killer, but Seemed like he was testing who was in the tent? Guess I'll never know. And for that I'm kind of glad. Story 15. 3 Men in the Woods and the Button Latch on My Forest Axe. Last summer I was camping with my partner and our 30-pound dog along a creek in a popular area in a nearby national forest. It was an established site, but not a campground. Parking spot, fire ring, nice flat area with access to the creek. Dead of night we are woken up by a large truck parked by our car, just idling. Eventually 3 men get out. They enter our camp. They are talking quietly. The truck and creek makes us unable to hear what they are saying. I'm pretty sure it's not good. Meanwhile our dog has been growling slowly the whole time. Early on I whispered to my partner to be quiet, hold the dog and hide. I got out of our sleeping bag and put my shoes on. The only thing I had for defense was a forest axe, halfway between hatchet and axe, very useful for getting by in the woods. It had a leather sheath with a metal button latch to protect the blade. They took their time, perhaps as intimidation, but eventually got closer to our tent. I loudly popped the metal button from the latch, taking the sheath off, preparing to become an axe murderer or be murdered myself apparently. All 3 heard the latch. My assumption is they thought it was a gun holster, quickly left the camp, got in their truck and left without a word spoken. So yeah, guys who wanted to have an impromptu murder party in the woods for unknown reasons in the middle of the night, let's not meet.